The purpose of this video is to do a bit of an explainer or an overview of what you guys should look for when you're actually trying to buy a used laptop. Which of these laptops that I find on the market may be best for me to pick up. It can be really overwhelming with specifications and that kind of thing. When you're buying a new laptop, it can be really easy to go into, Best Buy and say, oh, I have, this is my workflow and what kind of laptop should I be working at? And they can come to you and say, this one has this spec or that. When you're looking at the used market, you may have 5, 6, 7 years of laptops that you're looking at, or, MacBooks or whatever type of computer you're looking at. And that can be really overwhelming because you don't necessarily know what you're looking for. The first thing you're going to want to decide is the type of laptop. So if you go out there and you say, okay, I want a MacBook or I want a Windows machine, that's totally different. This is not going to be a MacBook overview. If you want to use Mac OS, you're going to have to look at Mac OS, but there's tons of Mac channels out there that are going to be able to do that way better than I am. So I'm not going to cover Macs. However, I'm going to look at laptops and that type of thing. One thing that I'm going to briefly touch on is you have tablets. A lot of people will go out there and they'll say, I can pick up like an Android tablet and, get myself a keyboard and, hook that up and I can use it as a device, which is great if you're just typing Android devices. However, there are, Microsoft Surface. This isn't a Surface, this is an Android tablet, but I've had many Surfaces over the years and they can be really good because they're full-blown Windows. Microsoft Surface are not, I wouldn't really call them a laptop. They're more of a hybrid. You get the tablet type style, but you also get the folio cases and that you can type on them, but you can also detach and have the true tablet. There are advantages to a Microsoft Surface type device in terms of super portability. You can take that off and you can truly have a tablet you can take with you, set it somewhere and watch media. But there are disadvantages of them as well. They're very, very difficult to repair, very, very difficult to upgrade as well, or not upgradable at all. So really when you're buying into a Surface, you need to be very careful with what you're buying because you need to make sure that matches your specifications that you need right away. One consideration that you might be making is maybe I should buy myself a Chromebook. That might be the best way to go because Chromebooks are cheap. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but I don't think Chromebooks are very good. They may be good for young kids because they're relatively hard to break and relatively cheap, but they often have really bad screens that look terrible, to be honest. They are underpowered and they run Chrome OS. Chrome OS is problematic in some ways because you have to have internet access to access all of your files. They often have very limited storage, very limited RAM, because a lot of it is offloaded into the cloud. You're doing a lot of this stuff online. If you don't have access to the internet, that can be a major problem. If you want an actual nice Chromebook, you're actually going to pay a lot of money anyways, because the cheap Chromebooks that you may see out there typically have dull, dark, low resolution screens, very little RAM, no storage whatsoever, usually eMMC storage or no upgradability whatsoever. Chromebooks may have security for a long time and they're often supported for like 5 to 10 years. And you look at that and you say, oh, this, I can use this laptop for 5 to 10 years because Google is going to keep supporting the security. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but your Chromebook may be pretty crappy the day that you buy it. I've had Chromebooks, several in the past year that I've just played around with, and they are not good, to be honest. So for Chromebooks, you're going to pay a lot of money to get into a good Chromebook, at which point you can just buy a Windows laptop, probably brand new. The first thing to consider is, do you want a gaming laptop? Which I don't have one in front of me, but I have several gaming laptops. Do you want to get yourself a business laptop or an Ultrabook type of thing? When it comes to used laptops, gaming laptops can be they can be really enticing, but there's some issues with them as well. Gaming laptops typically, they run a lot hotter, people run them a lot harder, and so they have typically a lot more wear when you're buying them used. Relatively recent gaming laptops can be a really good buy, and you can save a lot of money by buying, a 1 or 2 year old gaming laptop. But when you're getting back, 3, 4, 5 years, a lot of times they do have a lot more wear, and you're often paying a premium for them as well. Personally, I think the best option is to get into these kind of business class laptops if you're looking for more of a multi-purpose use, obviously not for people who are going to be doing a lot of heavy gaming. Some of the advantages of business style laptops is, often they're lightly used by someone who's at a business. Sometimes they're off lease and, in immaculate condition. This Dell right here is quite literally mint condition, and I got it for a really good price recently. And the ThinkBook is also really, really good condition. The ThinkPad's a little beat up, so you do have to look into them as well. You can get beat up business class laptops and less beat up. One of the advantages that I find to business style laptops is you often have a lot more expandability because they're meant to be potentially upgraded a little bit more in terms of when you open them up, what you can do inside, upgrading the RAM and that kind of thing. So even though it's a slightly older processor, they may have longer legs because you're actually able to upgrade them a little bit more than, say, a super Ultrabook. You may look online and see something like a Dell XPS, which are really nice laptops, but a lot of the times they're much less upgradable or not upgradable. They may have some upgradable storage. If you come with a 256 gigabyte SSD or something, you can maybe throw in a bigger one and get a lot more storage. However, the RAM is typically not upgradable whatsoever. These type laptops, these business ones, are really easy to upgrade in most cases and also really easy to repair or, swap out batteries and that kind of thing. You can really add a lot of value by, taking a slightly older machine, adding a tiny bit of upgrades to it hopefully for cheap, and getting a really, modern class laptop for a pretty good price. I think the most obvious thing is here, I have 2 different sizes. These are both 14-inch or thereabouts. This is a 15-inch here. You may be able to find 16 inches or 13 inches. That's really just going to be user preference. If you want to have, a dedicated number pad, the ThinkBook over here, and you can get ThinkPads in that in the 15-inch, you typically have a, dedicated number pad. So if you're doing a lot of spreadsheet work or you just like to type on a number pad, it's really nice. And of course you have a bigger screen. So if you're doing content creation, which is what I do on this laptop right here, I'm actually going to edit this video on this laptop. It is nice to have a bigger screen because you have more side by side. 13-inch can be really, really nice for, document editing and on the go, but it can be very limiting when it comes to actually, how much workspace are you getting on that. So the first thing to decide is how big do you want. I think for a lot of people, the sweet spot is 14 inches, but for people who are, looking for a more professional workflow and want to have a laptop that can kind of do everything, 15 inches is actually kind of where it's at. And you can get still Ultrabooks or, thinner laptops like this one here that's really portable despite being 15 inches. I think a lot of people are going to get, caught up in the brand type issue. I don't think that's as important as people think. When you're getting into business class laptops, a lot of them are built really well. So you can get HP. HP has a lot of business class laptops. Obviously, Lenovo has the ThinkPad, which is legendary. They have a good reputation for an obvious reason. So Lenovo ThinkPads are obviously a good option. There's also the Lenovo ThinkBook, which is a slightly more recent invention or iteration. These are around 3 or 4 years old when they first came out with them. And they're a little bit more user focused than the ThinkPad, but it doesn't really make a huge difference that you may think. They actually have very good build quality. The main thing is you're actually getting a slightly different keyboard. With the ThinkBooks, you get a lower profile typing experience. Still nice and snappy, but it's a little bit lower profile. And you do lose the typical, the think point or the track point little nub type thing. After that, you have Dell. The Dell Latitude here. Dell Latitude is one of their business lines, and they make really great stuff. Like I said, there's the XPS on that too, but the Dell Latitude is one of their better, I call them business lineups. There's lots of other brands out there too. There's Asus, there's Acer. And they don't necessarily focus as much on the business lineup, but you can still get really good deals and really good value laptops out of that. But in my opinion, I think one of the best things you can go for is these actual business style laptops, especially if you're going back a few generations and you don't want to pay a lot, because these were had for really cheap. I got my ThinkPad here for about 100 Canadian dollars, which is really good. That's like 70 American dollars. That's quite cheap. I got the Dell here for 150 Canadian dollars, which is around 105, 110 American dollars. Not bad. And I got the ThinkBook here. This is a lot newer. I got the ThinkBook here for about 250 Canadian dollars or so, which will be a little under $200 for Americans. So once you get past the brand issue, which I don't think is as much of an issue as a lot of people think, what actually becomes important is the specifications. That's a very important thing, and that's the most confusing for, I think, the average consumer. So we have 2 Intel laptops here, and we have an AMD laptop here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the AMD out of here, because that's not going to be as important right now, and I'm going to talk about the Intel laptops, because I want you guys to know there's quite a difference with Intel. A lot of people get focused on the i3 versus i5 versus i7 or i9 name that comes with some of these processors and say, well, if it's an i5, it's got to be better than an i3, which is true if it's the same generation. But for example, if you get an item from 2020 that's an i5, it's still going to be much, much faster than a 3-year-old i7. So the generation of the processor can actually be much more important than you think. I actually picked up the ThinkPad here specifically because I wanted to do this video and compare them. These laptops are only 1 generation apart. This one here is a 7th generation Intel. This one here is an 8th generation Intel. There's a big difference when it comes to these 2 laptops in terms of the processing power and what they can do. 7th generation Intel laptops, for example, if you have a 7300U or before, for example, a 6300U or even older than that, they're going to be dual core processors. They have 2 cores and potentially 4 threads. So basically 2 brains in them to do processing. There's a limited amount of parallel processing you can do at one time, depending on the amount of cores you have. So if you have multiple things going at one time, YouTube, spreadsheets open, potentially doing other things as well, you're going to eat up the cores in this really fast because this only has 2 cores. You may find that the system is starting to slow down when you have a lot of workload on it, even if you have lots of RAM, because the system just doesn't have as many cores to do the processing as you want. And even if you're doing one demanding task, for example, video editing or something, a lot of times those will leverage more than 1 core as well. So you may find that even though these computers are 1 year apart, and this may be even like an i7 and this an i5, potentially the 1 generation newer laptop may be a lot quicker. So in this case here, this 7th gen, this is an i5 7th gen, it's a dual core processor, and I found that it struggles quite a bit when it comes to doing multiple things at one time. If I'm just browsing the web, it doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Spreadsheets, that's no problem. I have YouTube open with a video playing, especially at HD video, and then I have a spreadsheet open I'm typing on. Maybe I'm doing some research in my browser as well. This thing really starts to chug. And the other thing that I find really annoying is that the fans will really start going on this. You're going to find that with a dual core processor, you hit that kind of load point where the fans really start going because the system is really working hard. much earlier than a quad core processor. So this one, I find that if I'm doing like anything on this laptop besides like literally just looking at websites, the fan's just kicking right away. And that creates noise, but it also drains your battery a little bit quicker. This is not a hot laptop by any means. However, you will drain the battery quicker if the fans are going, and it can be annoying. With this one here, it's a quad core. There's a lot more power in this laptop. One of the most important things with that is when you're doing the same tasks on this, the fan isn't actually turning on because the system is not under load. It's not being demanded because it has twice the amount of cores as this right here. It doesn't work out specifically that it's twice as fast of a laptop. However, when you're doing multiple things at one time, this laptop doesn't really seem to care. It's just hanging out there and it's totally fine. For most people who are looking for a semi-modern laptop that they're going to be using for multiple years and potentially using for a lot of different purposes, I recommend an 8th gen Intel processor. The reason that I recommend 8th gen, like I said, is that it's a quad core processor. So if you get an i5 or an i7, doesn't matter. You're going to be getting a quad core. You're going to get a lot more life out of a laptop like this in the future, but even now it's going to work a lot better. Windows 11 also does not formally support 7th gen Intel. So if you can load up Windows 11 on this laptop here, but technically it's not supported, and you may have issues with things like updates and with security as well in the future. Whereas 8th gen is formally supported by Windows. So Windows 10 is going to be going out in a couple of years, so you can still get a couple of years out of this regardless, even if you want to use this laptop now. However, with a system like this, you can throw on Windows 11 and get many more years of use out of it because it is officially supported. Another consideration that this can be real confusing is then we have AMD to look at. So there's Intel and AMD. Intel is more popular and more common. AMD is still pretty popular, but you're not going to find as many used laptops with AMD. For AMD laptops, I didn't find them to get any good really at all until the 3000 series Ryzen processors. If you get an earlier laptop with a different AMD processor, avoid it. The 3000 series are where you really start to get a lot more competitive with the Intel processors. And that's when Intel actually got better too, because Intel saw competition, so they got a lot better. This here is a 4000 series AMD processor, which is very capable even today. This is a 4600U, which is a 6-core processor versus a 3-core processor. Even the 3000 series AMD processors are really, really good. There isn't a huge difference. Some people will, look at Intel versus AMD and say they're totally different. That I find is actually more relevant nowadays. Around this generation, it's not a huge difference in terms of the raw processing power. You may find AMD has a little bit better battery life. I find that their battery management is better. The systems run a little bit cooler and they use a little bit less battery, but Intel is no slouch, especially in 8th gen. I find 8th gen processors very capable, to be honest, from Intel. A major consideration, however, between AMD and Intel, and this is something that is becoming more prevalent nowadays, is the integrated graphics between the two. Intel integrated graphics, frankly, are not very good. Even nowadays in 2023, 2024, they're not good. You can use them for simple gaming, absolutely, and basic desktop tasks, you're not going to notice any difference whatsoever. If you're just using this as a productivity laptop, it doesn't matter to you which one you get. However, if you are going to be doing some light gaming, this one here, it struggles even in older games like 2015, 2014, even on the native resolution of 1080p, this system chugs, or it just can't do it. This one here uses Vega graphics in the integrated graphics department, and this one here, I can play modern AAA games on this. Mind you, I do have to either decrease the resolution or decrease the settings. However, it can run modern AAA games on this laptop. If you're looking at older games, for example, from 2015, 16, 17, 18, it's nothing for this system to run them at the native resolution with relatively respectable settings. The 6000 series of AMD that came out in 2022, more or less, has the graphical processor that you're going to find in very similar to the Steam Deck. We all know the Steam Deck is very capable. Those are using RDNA 2 graphics. And again, that's a huge jump from the Vega graphics. However, I wouldn't get too bogged down in that because, if you're looking for a gaming laptop, you're probably going to buy a gaming laptop. However, if you want to get, mild gaming in there and be able to, no problem, I can play some games on this from time to time and use the integrated graphics in there, AMD is definitely the way to go. The Vega graphics are very capable on this 4000 series AMD processor, and even more so if you get a 6000 series or the new upcoming 7000 series that's later to release in this year right now. RAM is a very important consideration. It's very important if you're going to be buying a non-upgradable machine. So if you buy yourself like a Dell XPS or a Mac, even though this is not a Mac video, or a tablet type computer like a Microsoft Surface, those are generally not upgradable. Typically you can take off the bottom and you look inside, the RAM is all soldered. So if you find that your machine has soldered RAM, fully soldered RAM, you're not upgrading it. So typically at that point, I highly recommend that you buy in at 16 gigabytes of RAM. 8 gigabytes is not really enough in 2013. You may be able to get by with basic tasks, word processing and browsing the internet. You're going to be fine with 8 gigabytes. But if you want to use this for more productivity purposes, you want to have a lot of things open, and you potentially want to use it in the future, 16 gigabytes is where I recommend most people buy into a laptop, which means that if you buy a system that has soldered RAM, such as a Microsoft Surface or a Dell XPS or something along those lines, or a Mac, you're going to want to make sure you get the amount of RAM on the day that you buy it from the used market, because you're not going to be able to upgrade it. That moves me into what I really like about these business class laptops, is that they're very upgradable. So all of these laptops here, you can add in unsoldered RAM. So you can buy on, Amazon or eBay or locally, you can buy some SODIMM RAM, which is laptop RAM, and you can pop them into these laptops. This one here has 2 open slots built into the motherboard. It came with 8 gigabytes, so I bought another 8 gigabyte stick that I can stick into this and bring this up to 16. A lot of times you can add more, you can get them to 24. Which can be a nice way to go, because if you buy a laptop like this that has only 8 gigabytes and this one has 16, a lot of times the seller will say charge a premium, maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe even $100 for that 16 gigabyte model. But if you know that you can upgrade it with a stick that you can buy online, you can take this one that was $50 cheaper and just pop in like a $15 stick that I bought locally and save money. This one here actually is a little different, because half of the RAM is actually soldered in this machine. So if you open it up, you'll notice only one slot. So this one has 8 gigabytes soldered to the motherboard, which is how I got it. And then it had one empty slot. So you could stick in another 8 gigabyte stick and bring it up to 16. I actually put in a 16 gigabyte stick into this, so now I have 24. A lot of times you want your RAM to be paired up because it's going to run in dual channel and be a little bit faster. However, for my purposes, the first 16 will run in dual channel, and that'll be great for, if I'm doing games or video editing, that kind of stuff. However, if I have a lot of files open and I'm doing, Word documents and working on my school basically, or my job, and I have a lot of things open, I don't have to worry about exceeding that 16 gigabytes, and I can have tons of stuff open, and then I can just close the laptop, put it to sleep, go to where I'm going, and I can just open it up and resume work. I don't have to close things down all the time. So that's a really nice thing about these older business style laptops, is you can upgrade the memory and get, 16 gigabytes, 24 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, whatever your workflow is. And you can do it for a pretty cheap cost. The amount of storage that a person needs is very variable between 2 different people. I need a lot of storage because the files that I work with are massive. Obviously, I do video editing, and those can be several gigabytes per video. The clips can be several gigabytes, so I can use up my storage real quick. But also the data that I use for my job and for my school is also very, very large. So I need lots of storage. Some people may not need that much storage and are totally fine with a lower amount of storage that comes with the machine, and they just want a little bit more speed. However, with most laptops, you can upgrade the storage. Even the business class ones like the XPS, typically you can upgrade the storage. When you get into the Microsoft Surface type tablets, you're not actually able to upgrade the native storage inside. You could, you'd have to take it apart, but that's a risk. You can actually break the device, and it's a huge pain, and they're not cheap. Typically, you're going to be relying on an SD card to expand the tablet style Windows machines. All 3 of these laptops actually came with 256 gigabytes of storage, which for me is not even close to enough. But the nice thing is that all of them are upgradable. If you only had one socket inside, one NVMe slot, typically you can just open up the laptop, take out the bottom, take out the storage, put in a new one, and load up Windows, and away you go. You're totally fine. This one here only has one storage inside. So basically, if I want to upgrade this, I have to take out the current SSD and put in a new one that's much bigger, which is fine. But then you have to reinstall Windows, which can be a hassle for some people, but it's something you can certainly do. And recently, storage prices are dropping like crazy. In Canada, you can get a 2 terabyte NVMe that would have been probably 3 or 4 times more expensive the same time last year. There's actually 2 ports inside this one here. So the nice thing about that is you can leave the one that comes with it with Windows installed and just pop in a new NVMe right into the bottom of the device and just have more storage. You don't necessarily have to go through the hassle of reinstalling Windows. This one here as well has 2 NVMe slots inside, so I left the 256 that came with it with Windows installed. I just refreshed the Windows installation, and I just popped in a 2 terabytes. Now this one has the 256 that came with it, and I added a 2 terabyte storage for really cheap. And the nice thing is that with these type of laptops, with storage prices dropping as they are right now, you can get a machine that doesn't really have much storage, and you may be able to get it for a lower price as a result. You can buy yourself a new SSD online, an NVMe drive, for really, really cheap, maybe $50, maybe $60. Pop them in your machine and get a ton of storage at a really low cost. One important thing that a lot of people overlook when buying a laptop is the screen, unfortunately. The one negative with these business style laptops is they typically are sold with multiple tiers of screen. Often if you go onto Lenovo website or Dell website, you can even customize the screen when you build the machine. So some businesses may opt to get kind of a crappy screen, a 720p resolution screen that may be very, very dim. So you're going to want to ask your seller if they have the details on there. That's great. But if they don't, you may want to ask them specifically what are the specifications on the screen there. I highly recommend avoiding 720p screens. That's the resolution. 720p screens are going to be really blurry on a larger laptop, and typically they're also quite dim because they're just cheaper panels. So typically you want to buy in at 1080p or above. So 1080p is the baseline. often you can go up to 1440p. All three of these laptops are offered as 1080p variants. They're also offered at 1440p. These three are all 1080p, but if you can find yourself a 1440p screen, that's even better. It's going to work really well for productivity work. The text will look nicer. You'll have a lot more screen real estate. One of the disadvantages is as you go up in resolution, so you go from 1080p up to 1440p and potentially even 4K, you're going to be using a lot more battery because your graphics processor has to drive that image on the screen, so you can drain battery fast. So for a lot of people, if you're using an older laptop, 1080p may be the perfect compromise between battery life and performance and value. However, one advantage if you go with the higher end screens, typically they're a little brighter, they're going to be a better technology, potentially like anti-glare or touch even maybe. So there's advantages looking at the screen. Definitely don't get a 720p screen as a baseline. However, ask about that, make sure they're 1080p or 1440p and then decide. Usually you're going to be getting a much better screen that way. So I have these all at the welcome screen right here just to kind of compare the differences here. This one by far has the worst screen. It's 1080p, but it's quite a bit dimmer. May not come well in the camera because often the iPhone adjusts, but this one here is pretty dim. It's okay, but it's pretty dim. This one here is not bad. It's a 300 nit screen, 1080p. It looks fine. On a bigger screen, having the same resolution, it's a little blurrier, but it doesn't make a big difference there. It may not come across very well on the screen, but the Dell here has by far the best screen. It's really, really bright, quite vivid colors, and the color accuracy is really nice. The color accuracy on this is not that great. It's okay, but it's not the best. So if you're going to be doing video editing or photo editing and color is important for you, you may want to look at the specifications and see how color accurate the screen is. This one here is not that color accurate. This one here is not really that color accurate either here. This one here has a really nice screen, and I didn't pay any more really than the other ones to get this really nice screen here. So it's something to look into, look up the model number. If it's important to you and you do a lot of video editing or photo editing, the screen brightness and the colors is actually really important. So the reason you're buying a laptop and not a desktop is that you need portability. Battery is going to be a very important consideration for you. These older laptops are going to have batteries that have been used for potentially quite a lot. Batteries have a finite number of times that they can be cycled, charged, uncharged, and they kind of just degrade over time as well. So laptops that are a little bit older, you're going to save a lot of money on the laptop itself, but you're potentially going to get a little bit more wear on the battery that you buy. One thing that's very important to consider when buying a used laptop is how is the battery health or the battery life left on these laptops. The best thing to do then is you can ask the seller if it's eBay or on Facebook Marketplace or whatever you use locally to do a battery test. I can put on the screen how to actually do a battery test and you'll see how to do that. And that'll give you the average amount of battery life that's left on. It'll maybe be 47,000 watt hours or something like that, which is the design capacity. And then the battery may have potentially half of that, maybe 27,000. And so what would have been an 8-hour laptop is now maybe a 3-hour laptop before the battery dies. Even if the battery is not that great on the laptop that you're looking at, it all is not necessarily lost, because typically with these business style laptops, it's really easy to actually replace the battery, take off the bottom, unplug the battery, get rid of it in a recycling center or whatever. On eBay or even Amazon, you can often find replacement batteries for these for really, really cheap, sometimes $30 or $40 for a full replacement battery. And this one here I don't think does that all either. However, this laptop, if I were using it on a regular basis, I'd have to dish out probably another $30 or $40 or even $50 to get a battery replacement. However, you could still save a lot of money at the same time. But if you are worried about replacing the battery, ask the seller to do a battery report and send you the image with that, and then you can get an idea of how much battery life is left on the laptop and if it's going to serve your needs. I think for a lot of people, I/O is very important. When you're getting into these business style laptops, most of the time they have really good I/O. Even this older one here, if you go with Intel, you also get Thunderbolt ports. You're going to be able to run docks as well, which is really nice. So I think for a lot of people, when you're getting into these business style laptops, business class laptops, one of their advantages is that you get really good I/O and you actually get a lot of legacy ports, SD card slots, multiple USB ports, even USB-C as well. Nice thing is when you get into some of these laptops, a lot of the time they do have proprietary chargers. So the Dell here has a proprietary Dell charger, which is a barrel style charger. Lenovo here has the typical Lenovo style charger. You can see there, it almost looks like a USB port. That's a Lenovo charger. So if you have a Lenovo branded charger, you can use it. But if your laptop doesn't come with a Lenovo charger, you may think you're kind of SOL. These two laptops here, they actually also accept USB-C type charging. So I actually use the same charger for all of these laptops as my tablet as well. So I can just plug it in via USB-C. I don't even have a Lenovo charger for this one at all. It didn't come with one. I just used USB-C that came with it. I don't use the Dell charger that I actually have for this that actually came with it at all. I actually just use the USB-C charger because it works for all of my devices and my tablet, and I just have one charger for really everything. Some of the more recent ones, like the ThinkBook, don't even have a proprietary charger at all. You actually only come with USB-C charging, so this has 2 ports. So again, I can use USB-C charging for all of these here, and it works perfectly fine. So my final takeaway in terms of the recommendations for buying, if you want to go with Intel, which is totally fine, there's nothing wrong with getting an Intel laptop, I do recommend definitely getting yourself an 8th generation Intel processor or newer. So it would be something like an 8650U, like this one here, but 8th gen is the way to go. 7th gen, unless you're really on a tight budget and you're only going to be using it for like typing documents, I do recommend avoiding the 7th gen processors because they have half as many cores as a rule, and they're just not as efficient. They tend to run, the fans tend to run a lot, and they're just not as good of a machine. So 8th generation Intel's great. You can often see 10th generation Intels as well, like a 1035 G1 or something like that. It is a newer generation. However, I find there's not a big jump from the 8th generation. So typically, I think the sweet spot right now, at least, is these 8th generation Intel laptops. They're really, really cheap, easy to find. Often they're in good condition, and you get a lot of processing power out of that CPU, but it's still pretty energy efficient as well. I'm a big fan of AMD laptops. If you look at my new gaming laptop reviews, they're all so far AMD laptops because I love AMD laptops. The thing is, they're a little bit harder to find because you're going to be getting a newer AMD laptop because the old ones, frankly, are not very good. So you're looking at 3000 series or above, which is a little bit newer, which is fine. You're not necessarily paying more. It's just that typically they're not as common, so a little bit harder to find. One of the advantages, as I said before, is if you're going to be doing any gaming on the laptop, basically take Intel and get rid of it. Typically, if you want to do a lot of gaming, you're going to be getting into these AMD laptops here. You're going to want to be looking at 3000 series, 4000, 5000, or 6000 series. You don't want to get anything earlier because they weren't very good. They're going to have Vega graphics or RDNA 2 graphics, but generally, the AMD type machines are going to have significantly better graphical capabilities than these Intel machines here. So now what I want to do is I want to have a look at the laptop. Let's say I'm going to inspect it and I'm going to pick it up and buy it off somebody. There's a few things you're going to want to look at. Obviously, make sure that the buttons all work. That's important. Make sure that your charger actually works, your ports that you want to check. So, you can take a USB with you, a little USB key or a USB-C, and just make sure your ports work. That's obviously very important. Test out the trackpad, make sure it works, and the keyboard works. That's pretty obvious. Typically, you can find that by just, using the laptop for a moment or two. You can come down here and you can type in system information. And you'll see this pop up here, and I can have a look at it, and I can bring all the information about the laptop. So the first thing you're going to want to do is check your processor. So you can see processor there, AMD 4600U. You're going to want to make sure that matches the advertisement that you're looking for. It's very easy for someone who has a business style laptop to not actually know specifically what processor they're getting, and maybe just post the model number or just some pictures, and you're going to Google it, or you're going to look it up and say, well, it looks like it's one of these models, but there's various processors that are offered. So make sure you check the processor when you come in there. The next thing you can do is you can check the RAM here. So you can see installed physical RAM is 24. If you're buying a laptop that's 8 gigabytes of RAM, make sure it has 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you're buying one that has 16, make sure it says 16 here. So you're going to check that as well. If you're looking to buy a laptop with dedicated graphics, maybe you are, maybe you are not. The next thing you can do is you can come in here and search. And you can type in DX Diagnostic, hit enter. You can skip this if you want, doesn't really matter. This will pop up and it's going to basically tell you what graphic or processor you have in here. So you come over here, you click on display, and it's going to tell me, for example, that I have AMD-based Vega graphics in this machine here. If you have a gaming laptop, typically you're actually going to have a second one. So it'll just say display here, and there'll be another one that says display. The first one will tell you what your integrated graphics are that are in the chip itself. The second one will tell you if you have dedicated graphics. For example, it may say GTX 1050 if you're buying a NVIDIA GTX 1050. And then the last thing you're going to want to do is check your battery. So you can come down here and you can type in, CMD. You can come down here and you can type in CMD, command prompt, right click on that and go run as administrator. When that pops up, you're going to basically type this in. I copy and pasted it, but it's power CFG space / battery report. And then you basically hit enter. And it's going to give you a battery report. It tells you specifically where it is so you can go and find it. So here's my battery report here. It's telling me which laptop I have. And you can see here what the battery actually has done. So this battery, even though this is a laptop that's a couple years old, it's only been battery cycled 20 times, which is incredibly good, to be honest. That's pretty abnormal. 44590, and it's actually higher than the design capacity. So this battery is actually perfect. It's actually probably essentially an unused battery. However, when you buy older ones, they may be a little bit lower. But the biggest thing is you can come in here and you can make sure that it has a reasonably good battery if that's important. If it's designed to be 4400 and maybe it has 27 left, so you're going to get about 50% battery life, you can come in here and double check that. But if they promise you that it has really good battery life and they're going to check it, you can come in here and you can make sure that you're actually getting the laptop that you're paying for. And I probably didn't cover everything, but I hope that helps a little bit. If you have questions, fire them down into the comments. Also, any of the viewers, feel free to help each other out. And that's one thing, you can post this online. You may not have yourself a resource that's going to help you buy the used laptop that you're looking at online. So let's help each other out. Go down to the comments here, ask questions about a laptop that you may be considering. We can chat back and forth. And that way, hopefully we can get everyone the laptop that they need, that is going to meet their needs and is also going to be really low cost.